With version SS3 onwards, the use of the true hidden lines display has been discontinued in preference to dynamic display, resulting in the display problems that we saw at the end of the last video. And just to refresh your memory, I'm looking at the front section reference here, and I'll zoom in, and we see that we have a couple of problems. First, you see a series of lines which should not be there. The first is this hidden line, and these two solid lines in this location. And these are the tangent lines that MicroStation sees when a smooth surface joins a curved surface. Now, these really aren't lines at all, but MicroStation sees them as such. And to correct this problem, we need to use what's called cached display in place of the dynamic display. Now, let me explain very briefly what these two methods mean. In dynamic display, the edges are displayed as pixels in a raster, and a raster is similar to a graphic file. This is an efficient method, but it's not very accurate and leads to the problems that we're looking at right now. In cached display, the visibility of edges is explicitly determined by calculation. This is a more accurate method, but slower, and it can take significant calculation time, especially in complex models. Consequently, while the references are still associated with the underlying geometry, i.e. the design model, the cached display will not change if the design model is edited, thereby reducing the calculation time. In a nutshell, this means that if you want an accurate edge display, you will need to use the cache method and manually update the references if the geometry is changed. You will know if a reference needs to be refreshed or reloaded when the cached value in the visible edges column is highlighted in red. There's also a notation in the status column. So, looking at our reference display, with the front section reference selected, click on the dynamic value here under visible edges. And we see that we have a dynamic setting. Click on the dynamic drop-down, and under that we see cached, and this is the one we want. Ignore legacy, this is really for older versions of MicroStation. So click on cached, and notice now that this icon is activated, which is the visible edge settings. So click on that, and here we see the current settings for visible edges. Don't worry about the method or the accuracy, the defaults are just fine. We have this remove smooth edges, that must be on. That can be off and that can be off. So do that and say OK. Now we see that the value is cached. And if we look at the actual reference now, we see that the two lines here and the single line there have disappeared. And we're seeing a relatively correct section view here. However, it's still not perfect, because if you look closely at this line through here, which should be a hidden line, it's actually showing as a solid line. Well, technically it's showing as both. If you look very, very closely, you will see a hidden line and a solid line. Now, unfortunately, there's not a lot we can do about this. And it stems from the fact that we use the fence clip method to generate this section in the first place. There is a slightly better way of doing this, and we'll look at that in the next video. However, this is what we're stuck with the current settings, and we have to go with the flow, as it were. Now, as a matter of interest, while we're here in this drawing, take a look at my right side view. Notice anything peculiar? Well, we have some very unusual and extra lines. There's this vertical line that runs from top to bottom, this horizontal line that runs all the way across. They should not be there. This is not an artifact of the actual view, it's actually my fault. And let me show you what I mean. I'm going to go back to the model. If you remember, we made these two sections with the fence clip method, and I simply copied the sections off in the X direction. Unfortunately, I copied them in the exact X-axis. So when you look at the right view, we see all three of these objects stacked behind each other. So if I select my basic bushing, we see that partially shown in the right side view. If I select this one, we see partially again, and this one shows partially again. What I need to do, of course, is to take these two and move them in top orientation away. And now we see the correct right side view. And these two, again, should be moved if we wanted to see right sides of each one. but that's why the sheet view, right side view, was displaying as it was. Now, one other little piece of information here about the cached method and the visible edges settings is that you can export what are called visible edge files. They have a .hln extension. Export them out to a separate file. And the key here is that the underlying geometry is not present in this visible edges file. This means you can send it to a third party without having to worry about the design itself being available to that third party. They merely see the visible edges, not necessarily all of the underlying geometry. Try that for yourself. Try the cache method on all of the views you have here. And then in the next video, we'll move on to a different method which solves that hidden line problem.